Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everyone. This is the hall where the meeting this year wanted to propose something that is a little bit different and goes beyond a debate and a round table. Tonight we are in front of as you can see, the table is a little bit different to the conference tables. We're here in front of a sort of a performance which is between reading, dramaturgy, witness, and a telling of a tale. We've asked a historical friend of the meeting, Nembrini, very well known. We asked him to imagine himself in his TV studio, and this time he has a bigger public, a bigger live audience, and propose to us something of Pinocchio, of his reading of Pinocchio. Franco Nembrini, I don't think needs a presentation. He created schools, writes, he speaks for television. What else do I need to say? Another thing that I like to say, though, is that Franco began as someone who talks to teach, who teaches. He begins in the educational scene, and that the people that listen to him be educated by what he says. He is a teacher no matter what he does, both when he's in the classroom and in TV programs. We've brought his scene. We also thank Parco Collodi that helped us bring the scenography here, the set here. Pinocchio doesn't need to be introduced either, and there is no need to explain the links with Pinocchio too much with what we are talking about in these days. No one like Pinocchio had the quest to become a man, from being a puppet to becoming a man. And this theme, this character, can help us also to understand the title of the meeting. Finally, the last thing I would like to say is, why do we thank Parco Collodi? All those who help the meeting in various ways, because without this dedication, this work, this effort, this generosity, and this gratuitousness of all of us who work and who let us borrow the Pinocchios and the sets, all of this the meeting would not be possible. And we are launching the possibility to donate and contribute to the building of the meeting through the desks Dona Ora, which you will find within the meeting. You can only donate through these desks and through the volunteers that are wearing the Dona Ora t-shirts. I don't know whether to say enjoy the show, but I can't say enjoy the conference either. So I say enjoy Franco and Pinocchio.
I had some help to introduce this topic, this meeting. Just to show, just to start this meeting with some pictures, I thought it would be very nice and very evocative. We have little time to be able to give an idea of the amazing wealth of this text. It's going to be difficult, but I'll be able to give you some kind of indication, clues of how you can read this text at home. It's one of out of the three books that has really accompanied me in my life, because I had met him early. I had learned about Pinocchio early as well with Dante. It is a book that I read when I was a child. Really appreciating the book. Maybe also with a tendency to be a bit more or less moralistic in the sense of trying to be good. I had also saw this book, which has been written by Cardinal Biffi, published in the 70s. The Theological Commentary of Pinocchio. In 20 years ago, when I started teaching religion, I was in a lot of difficulty as a young guy. I just happened to come across this book in the summer. And it happened that this had covered lessons for a whole year. This book had really given me information of things that I intended to teach for the whole year. Life to be as an adventure, a beautiful adventure. Life to be also a struggle, a battle. Life also being considered as a type of war, to find oneself. And so for 8 years, I had taught religion, always reading this book, these amazing pages, which in reality I've never actually stopped reading. There are such clear images in this book that really has accompanied me, and it really inspires me in the present. A very brief premise in which Cardinal Biffi had also introduces, in which he explains a metaphor of a man living in a Christian experience. He probably did not even intend to create this theological reading, but it is so legitimate. He says that art is very much like this. Is someone that puts in something that is his. It is a dialogue between him, the artist, and the listener, the reader. Because it is always rewritten by someone who, or rethought by someone who is listening. So when I was reading it, it was something that had really convinced me. We are in 1980, in which Lodi had
cerca di parlare al cuore dei bambini.
The child version of Collodi seems to emerge. He starts writing literature for children at this moment. He sends them to the editor, his work, and calls them bambinate, things for children. They get published anyway. He publishes them periodically in children's magazines, and straight away on chapter 16, at halfway through the story, that episode ends with the word fine, end, the end. But what happens? The children write to the editor and complain that the story ends with Pinocchio's hanging. Collodi then is told about this complaint, and he says, how am I supposed to finish this? The editor, Collodi says, how am I supposed to continue this? And the editor said, make him resurrect. So from this, one of those pages is a symbol of that Christian culture and justifies Cardinal Beefy's reading of Pinocchio. I'm going to read here a page, this page that I've just mentioned, to show you what I mean. There are moments that give me goosebumps. Certain moments he can't but use as a resource ancient Christian language. Listen to how he tells and describes Pinocchio's death by hanging. In the meantime, a very strong gust of wind made the poor hanging body hang to and fro, making it dangle like a bell. and the rope becoming more and more tight on his throat. He felt the air run away from his grasp, and he waited. He saw that nobody was coming. Nobody was coming, and then he thought once again of his father, and he said in some way or another, "If you were here," and he didn't have enough breath to say anything else. He closed his eyes and gave his last breath. One can say whatever he wants, but to a Christian awareness, we get goosebumps when a Christian reads this. "Father, if you were here, Father, Father, why have you abandoned me?" It would be enough just to read this page to see how Biffy, in fact, was right all along. So the great adventure of man, who was created by a father, must fight, must be aware of himself, and must earn what he was given once more to possess it by his father. And I wanted that this minimal set be here, because this alternative must challenge us. It must challenge us every day. Pieces of wood or fantastic puppets that are alive. Fantastic puppets that know how to dance, joke, and jump, and asks for his father to have an eternal life, because this puppet wants to see the world. This is once more why Biffy's interpretation really persuades me. I find him persuasive, with such a radical sense of the challenge that he proposes to us. There's a strangeness on which I've very often thought. This strangeness that this character, Maestro Ciliegia, some things happen to him at the beginning of the book. The piece of wood from Ciliegia passes to Geppetto, who starts to work the piece of wood. But why couldn't the story begin from Geppetto? Why did it have to begin with Maestro Ciliegia? What's the point of this first strange chapter with the character which never appears once again in the story? The only thing that I can say on this is that, one, it's beautiful, and it seems to me to be a sort of a premise, a condition of the reading. Many times my friends have said that I'm a little bit monothematic with age, but maybe it's just me staying on the essential things. But I must make a link with the Divine Comedy. It says that, in a sense, the first cantos, as they are conditioned to enter the Inferno, in the same way this first chapter is essential to enter into Pinocchio. To enter into the promise that life is. There was once a king that my younger readers will say, no, there was once a piece of wood it was not a piece of wood, a good piece of wood, but it was a bad quality of wood. But one day, this piece of wood arrived in the workshop of Master Antonio. This happened, and it gives us goosebumps, the idea that life happens. It's not fruit of randomness, it's not random. Geppetto goes to look for him. This piece of wood is desired, is looked for, is sought for. So once he finds him, Master Cherry says, this piece of wood finally has arrived. Now, perhaps you will remember the story. This piece of wood is not only a piece of wood, but it has something inside that can't be explained with its physical characteristics. There is something which makes it completely incomparable, irreducible compared to the others, its precedents. This is linked to the great mystery. And Collodi, who is a rationalist, a relativist, he can't admit that a piece of wood be more than a piece of wood. So we really need to imagine it, each one of us. We must look at our lives. Each one of us have a culture. If we look at the ideologies, for example, the Russian Revolution, what were they? Cultures were fruit of a culture of this kind, that man is nothing but what I can scientifically prove, what I can physically see, its biological components. Miguel Mañara also said this in another way. There's a way of looking at things in which even of a piece of wood, God knows everything. Maybe God can even make this piece of wood talk. God can imagine much more what I can demonstrate and what I can see. There is something alive, great.
And so in this way, something bad has been created in this world. But the doubt doesn't even come. Do you think that this piece of wood can also become something that someone can speak from? Someone who thinks like this would have to have a big imagination. Because when the other perceives the mystery, you start to pray, you start going on your knees. And so he gets the correct doubt. But he still has his faith. And he sees this piece of wood that is crying, and he just says he can't believe it, but he decides to be obedient to this. And so he says, is there something that is hidden between this? He looks at this piece of wood, and he starts to hit it against the walls of the room, and even up to the ceiling. It's not the communists or the Nazi that he's talking about. He's talking about the reality of a way of how you treat your kids, of the relationship between man and a woman. How beautiful it is to have this openness to reality. What a tragedy it is to reduce everything to something that you already know, to not be open to things, unexpected things. What a pity it is to have a reduction in a reality. So the person, the Master Cherry, he says this, he teaches us this one thing: the fear of life, the fear of reality, the fear of our knowledge, of our awareness. The last scene, in fact, where it says that the piece of wood says, "Stop, you are tickling me." The master then looks at it in awe and sits back down. His smile had been transfigured. And he changed his face to a sense of fear. How many times has fear beaten us in the sense that has defeated us? But Geppetto is different. He actually wants that piece of wood and is curious. And so the great hypothesis that Beefy works on in which Geppetto is actually named from, it derives from a name called Giuseppe, from a saint. Beefy says that Geppetto knows that he wants something amazing. He sees something amazing in that piece of wood, decides to take it home, and wants to see something amazing happen from that. He creates the arms and the head, and he already calls him son. He sees something amazing, half finished. In the 3rd chapter, when there is the act of the creation of God, what is explained is the actual creation, as if God had created the world. He made the eyes, ugly wooden eyes. Why do you stare so? There was no answer. After the eyes, Geppetto made the nose, which began to stretch as soon as it finished. It stretched and stretched and stretched, till it became so long it seemed endless. So the eyes were moving, and Geppetto was looking at them, stared at them fixedly at him. Geppetto, seeing this, felt insulted and said in a grieved tone, "Ugly wooden eyes, why do you stare so?" Geppetto says, "Stop laughing." And Geppetto continues and he says, "Stop laughing," said Geppetto. The mouth stopped laughing, but it stuck out a long tongue. "Pinocchio, give me my wig." But instead of giving it back, Pinocchio put it on his own head, which was half swallowed up in it. Geppetto became very sad and downcast, more so than he had ever been before. "Pinocchio, you wicked boy," he cried out. "You are not yet finished, and you start out being impudent to your poor old father. Very bad, my son, very bad." And he wiped away a tear. The suffering that man has in front of God. The suffering that God has in front of man. When Geppetto had finished his legs, he felt a kick. Geppetto says, "I had to think of him before." Too late. It's too late now. The word that had most shocked me was, "It's late now. It's late now." Because when he had made man, he realized that he had to make man with all of the consequences. What a great loyalty to God. A loyalty of God. It's too late. I had to think of it before. Now I have to go more deeply. A friend of mine, an Albanian friend of mine, who had converted recently, was explained the story. And all of the symbols of Christianity, and he had seen the cross and saw a word, Inri. He thought it was Italian. He had reflected on what they had told him, Christ having died on the cross. And he says at a certain point, "Oh, I've understood. I will not go back," which are the initials of INRI in Italian. I will not return back. God does not go back. He goes he goes deeply into things. And he when his legs were limbered up, Pinocchio started walking by himself and ran all around the room. He came to the open door, and with one leap he was out into the street. Away he flew. Poor Geppetto ran after him, but was unable to catch him. And at last, by sheer luck, a carabinier happened along, who, hearing all that noise, thought that it might be a runaway colt, and stood bravely in the middle of the street with legs wide apart. This is the story of salvation, of humanity and his attempt to go back to the Lord's house. To go back to who had conceived him, to go back to the Father. So like in Dante's image of a man waiting for God. So in the story there are incidents, accidents, the problems. And long periods of forgetting. When I was reading the title of the meeting, all that you have bequeathed to you by your father, earn it in order to possess it, I straight away thought of Pinocchio. What have we what have we earned by our fathers? Even if it is born as a puppet from a piece of wood, what have we inherited? With this undistinguishable desire. Who had wanted the son? It's a promise. Man inherits from his father and from his father before that one. And man is a promise for good. And Pinocchio feels this longing for happiness. A famous Italian actor said to me once, the only true lie about Pinocchio is probably the last sentence. How happy I am to have become a real boy. And I told him what I said. I think this is unjust. That happiness for him Pinocchio was made for happiness, for good. All of his errors, his faults, were also deeply happened because he was looking for a good for himself. So like in Miguel Mañara, how did I not understand before? Pinocchio has a tendency to look for happiness. His life is, he realizes that his life is made for this good. And so in this point of view, because in every episode there is a problem that shows a feature of our own lives, something very beautiful events. To think that life, for example, can just solve itself with a miracle. I'm not talking badly about miracles, please understand. To think that life knows shortcuts, false miracles, dreams, false dreams. To think that in the day-to-day life, but that deep down in life, that in these moments, in these events in Pinocchio, does tell us something about life. I want to show you the chapter that really moves me the most. So Pinocchio does escape, and the carabinieri takes him back. The carabinieri should have some justice and gets Pinocchio and gives him back to the father. But he's there with Pinocchio, and he's taken him by the nose. And sometimes I make this joke that I do with journalists, and it's a joke that I do anyway, just to have a laugh.
The difference between the dawdlers who exaggerate, like the media. Let's see if he brings him home. And the carabinier, he hears both parties, and he gives, he listens to the public opinion. So he leaves Pinocchio, he brings Pinocchio home and leaves Geppetto in prison. And the illusion that life is completely independent of relationships, that life can be without relationships and freer without relationships, and he has finally freed himself of his father. Once we got rid of our ideological fathers, now we are getting rid of our biological fathers. Like Woody Allen said once in a movie, God is dead and I don't feel very good about this. I don't feel very well. But in Moscow or in Ukraine, I can't remember, in the good old times, there was a writing, God died, signed by Nietzsche. He wrote under then this text, also Jesus has died, signed by Marx. And under this, another inscription, they feel better, signed Jesus. They feel better. This happened on the day of Easter. The fact is that Pinocchio thinks that he has resolved the problem. He finds himself in a world which is suddenly hostile. Before, everything was clear and bright. And remembering that he didn't eat anything, he felt hungry. And he looked, but he couldn't find anything. He looks for an egg, but he continues. The boy's appetite grows very fast. The empty feeling became hunger, and the hunger grew bigger and bigger. Do you remember? In the house of my father, even the servants have enough to eat, and I'm here eating with the pigs. This voice that says, go back to your father, this is the greatness of life, finds another expression. It was a night he goes to the village, but everything is dark. The shops are closed. The workshops are closed. The windows and the doors are closed, and there's not even a dog straying in the street. It seemed like a dead people's village. Taken by desperation and by hunger. When I read these pages in school, my students understand, because they have this sentiment all around them in the world. When the doorbell rings and they see a poor person he arrives home, Pinocchio arrives home after having knocked on many doors and been wet by buckets of water that were given to him, that were poured on him. He goes home, and this is a sign, what he feels is the sign of the lack of awareness. Pinocchio falls asleep with his feet on a foot warmer and awakens the next day with his feet all burned off. Can one live off dreams and illusions and put reality, real life, which burns, becomes ashes, and you continue to sleep and snore, and you live as if your feet were somebody else's? This is something that has to do with our daily lives and that my students live. Pinocchio snored away happily as if his feet were not his own. He dreams and he thinks that he's in the best possible world. What has to happen when we are... What has to happen in order for us to wake up from a situation like this? For me, the most beautiful page and descriptive page of what Christianity is. Finally, he wakes up because at dawn he opened his eyes just as a loud knocking sounded at the door. Somebody incessantly knocks on our door all the time. And we only need a minimum of availability, of openness. I didn't know how much I had entered. I was so sleepy. Do you remember this from the Divine Comedy? This is the same. One is woken up because of somebody that comes knocking on your door, an encounter, because God always knocks, or rings the doorbell, or rings your phone. Somebody arrives, and he makes you lift your head up. Who is it? He called, yawning and rubbing his eyes. Who is it? What's happening? Who's calling me? I'm here at the meeting. Who is calling me? What do you want from me? What do you want from me? Who is calling me through these friends? It is I, answered a voice. How could it be more evangelical, this phrase? It is I, answered a voice. It was the voice of Geppetto. And here, this is where the dramatic point begins. Behind the door, Pinocchio had closed it completely, and he had put the wooden bar in front. So Geppetto continues to shout, "Pinocchio, open up!" And poor Pinocchio would like. Let's think about our own children. They would like, but they can't. Their feet are burnt. Pinocchio tries to jump and stand up, and all of a sudden he finds himself on the ground without being able to move anymore. This is an apparent situation of total block. He is completely blocked, even if he wants to open the door. And the same for our children. They would like to, but they are not able to get up and open the door to their mother and their father. Who has to move? It's us. The adult has to take initiative. As the saying goes, if God can't get through the door, he will go through the window. So Geppetto invents a new way of getting into the house. And for me, this is incarnation. This is incarnation. God becomes close to man in an extraordinary, a strange way. Geppetto Many of us have this problem. Us parents, we ask, how can we get to them? How can we meet them? He is made for good. I know he is. But he can't open the door because his feet are burnt. So straight away he wanted to say, but then he wanted to give out to him. But once he saw him, and he saw him without feet, he became full of tenderness. He felt sorry for him. And how did you, thinking that all these tears and cries were only other pranks, he realized what really had happened. Talking to him while the tears ran down his cheeks, "My little Pinocchio, how did you burn your feet?" This is the incarnation, a description of the incarnation.
L'osteria. L'osteria del gambo. Faccio dei flash e chiudiamo. Abbiate pazienza. C'è il capitolo, adesso lo cerco, il capitolo 13.
In chapter 13, the pub of the red shrimp, the inn of the red lobster. It's a chapter in which Pinocchio, who meets a lot of times the talking cricket, Pinocchio tells the cricket that he is decided on the fact that he wants to go ahead. Don't trust, says the cricket. Don't listen to those who promise you wealth overnight, my boy. As a rule, they are either fools or swindlers. Listen to me and go home. But Pinocchio says, but I want to go on. The cricket says, the hour is late. I want to go on, says Pinocchio. The night is very dark. I want to go on. Look, the road is dangerous. I want to go on. And the chapter finishes with these repetitions of Pinocchio saying, I want to go on. In the Inn of the Red Lobster. How does he think of this? To tell Pinocchio
this is the only place, the Inn of the Red Lobster is the only place that if you want to go forward, you have to go backwards. So, and the lobster is the only animal that to go forward must go backwards. So this is not random, this is thought by the author. So one must ask for one's own life if everything is can be truly named progress. And maybe there is a true progress, a real going forwards. The cricket says, come back, go home. Go home to where you live. This is the only progress that in history can happen. And this is why we should call progress a going backwards, a going back. And in the life of the church, the church is represented by the fairy. And I make my last point. I had very little time, so they gave me a little time. At the end of the story, Geppetto is in the stomach of the fish, which is like the link with Jonah and the whale. But there is almost a descending movement towards the abyss. Just there in the abyss, right there in the abyss is the moment in which then life can begin again. Apart from the macro interpretation, we can talk about humanity, which finds its father again. And can become once and for all itself. There is also a turning over of the roles here. And many times I found myself saying this as an educator. If there is something great as falling in love, and even greater than getting married, even greater than becoming mother and father, which I many times thought was the climax of humanity, of the perfect, complete expression of what humanity is. Only very late, as an adult, I realized that I realized that there is a greater thing than all this. The most incredible experience that one may have in life is the experience not only of becoming father of children, but of becoming children of one's own children. And I say this because this happened to me, but I also say it because we speak very ill of this generation of young people. We have to stop, because this is a generation which is very wounded, confused, but curious. There are many things that I saw that I never saw before. Children that seriously give their lives to their fathers and their mothers. They give hope to their mother and their father. A little bit like Pinocchio. Geppetto waits for Pinocchio to grow a little, and he says, "I've gone into the mountains. You'll see when you're older. I can bring you. I'll bring you to the top of the mountain." And the father, in the meantime, didn't realize that he also aged. So what happens? That when he starts and they set off about to go, just in that moment, at halfway through the journey, the father collapses and he can't go on. He didn't realize that he lost his energy in the meantime. And the son says, was 20, Dad, you can't go on. Don't worry. Come on I'm going to carry you on my shoulders, which is like Aeneas and Anchises. I know that you can't finish, but so I'm going to continue to bring you. I'm going to bring you on my shoulders, but you help me to find the way. You continue to indicate the road to me. Because this is what paternity is. Offer your children the certainty of a road, not the certainty of your own greatness, but the certainty of a road, of a journey. And he, therefore, in an evangelical way, similar to the Gospels, offers himself as a help to his father.
God, have you really forgiven me the way that I am? And Geppetto doesn't run away. He stays in front of Pinocchio. Dearest Pinocchio, I don't know how to swim. And me, who is a good swimmer, I will bring you to the end. You know, like children, we say, be careful, you know. Think of concrete things. And Pinocchio, who says to Geppetto, his father, "Come and see." And Pinocchio takes the candle and he follows his father. "Come behind me and do not be afraid." It's written like that in the book, you know. Go behind me and come and see. Follow me closely, dear father, and you shall soon be saved.
Pinocchio, as he approaches the mouth of the shark to escape, he sees the sky full of stars, and this is similar to what happens in Dante at the end of each canticle, which we leave to go to the stars. He says, "Courage, father, we will arrive. Follow me and have no fear." He takes him on his back. And he goes back. They go back together, and in the last chapter, he finally becomes his true son in flesh and bone. How could we have had a moralistic approach to this text? A son, after taking his father on his shoulder, come and see, don't be afraid. And the final intervention of the fairy, which is the church, in other words, the sacraments, and become finally flesh and bones, a son of his father, and finally say, I'm a real boy. I can only say that we can only interpret this story like someone who says, now I know why I'm born. I'm born for beauty, for truth. And therefore, one may ask oneself, what have we inherited from our fathers? What have we been bequeathed that we need to earn to possess again? This awareness to have been born into the world for goodness, and that life cannot betray this promise if we are loyal to it. If we have eyes to see, if we have ears to hear, to listen, if we have enough curiosity to go towards reality and see what is there, because there is something that is always new. And to the question that we often asked ourselves, we were in Madrid, in Spain, when the terrorist attack happened, and Ernest called me from Sierra Leone and told me that they were picking up dead bodies from the mud. Literally. They were putting their hands into meters deep of pools of mud to take dead bodies. And my legs were trembling for what had happened in the terrorist attack. And I was saying, we were at a party, what are they celebrating? How can I celebrate? Why does the church ask us to celebrate? The church only asks me to pray in the way that it suggests us to pray. Blessed is God, Lord of the world, Lord of Israel. And then the church asks us to pray in the Vespers, my soul be magnificent to God. Give glory to God. And in the night prayer, sleep in holy peace. How can we say all this? We can say this because God arrived and saved his people. He came and did great deeds, and my eyes have seen your salvation. All of this, these Psalms help me to be in this, to avoid these temptations. And to wake me up, because that awareness, the memory arrives and it helps me to live. And I invite you to continue to read Pinocchio as a help for your lives.